Hello, my name is Eric Hines, and I'm an adjunct assistant professor of political science at the University of Montana. And I currently teach an online course on the European Union, and the course takes about 15 weeks. And I'm going to briefly just give you an overview of sort of how the course works if you were a student taking this course with me. When you first log on to the course shell, you're presented with a welcome screen that briefly introduces myself as well as some of the overall sort of goals of the class. And there's a list of the various sections of the course, which you can access in the course menu. There's announcements, there's a link to the syllabus, which contains pretty much the entire structure of the class. I'll briefly turn to the learning units more here in a second, which is the main bulk of the course. Students can access their grades and the feedback that I give them on their weekly assignments through this link. I'm not a student, so I can't access it since I don't have any feedback for myself. But students also can access discussion boards where some weeks the assignment is basically to engage in a discussion with other students in the course. Later on in the semester, students are to assign to small learning groups where they work together to try to resolve a problem facing the European Union, and they work together on a number of collaborative assignments in that goal. There's also a link to contact me as the professor, give my phone number, even have a widget so you can directly call me for free. Also get my office hours and my policy in terms of getting in touch with me. There's a link to tech support as well as to credits for some of the photos, and students engaging in group work also do some peer evaluations. The main bulk of the course happens here in the learning units. Each week, students engage with different readings with a different topic and subject, and I'll just walk you through an example of a learning unit, and then I'll walk you through an example of a problem unit, which is the sort of ultimate sort of end of the course, is to engage in these problem units. Each unit begins with a brief list of the learning outcomes and tasks, both for the overall course objectives that are listed in the syllabus, as well as specific outcomes for the particular model or the module that we're looking at. And the end is a list of the tasks, the specific concrete things that the students have to achieve by the end of the week or the 2-week period, either reading certain chapters of a textbook or looking at a mini lecture online or taking a quiz or writing a paper, these kinds of things. Typically, a issue will begin with a problem, some issue or challenge that students need to understand if they want to have a larger understanding of how the European Union works as a political system. I'll establish a criteria for resolving that issue, what exactly it is that helps us understand this particular problem, and offer a tentative solution to the problem. And then offer some basic guidance. What are the most important things that the students need to cover, or if there's anything missing from the textbook, from the readings, or something that needs to be updated, these kinds of things. At the end, they'll be assigned a particular chapter of the textbook. There often will be small quizzes where students will just reinforce their reading assignments and see if they're sort of getting what the text is trying to get across to them. They're ungraded, but they're a nice consistency check both for the students and for myself. Is there something that I assume students were understanding and that perhaps they were not? Again, I often have very small mini lectures which are about a topic that's not necessarily directly taken in the textbook, but as a way of sort of engaging with students. They're not usually too long. Try to have lots of pictures, and often we'll have a link at the bottom to additional resources that students might use to understand a particular topic if they're unsure about some issue. Eventually, the primary assignment each week is either a short paper, as in this case, or a short discussion where students are responding to questions that I've posed to them on the material that they've covered over the course of the week. Students write these short papers, these short discussions. I grade them and give them extensive feedback, and then often attempt to bring up certain things that they're sort of missing later on in the semester. Once students have undergone or sort of gone through a number of these learning units, they kind of have a basic understanding of the basic foundations of how the EU functions. And then we turn to a more collaborative and more sort of independently driven assignment, where students take on the role of trying to resolve actual problems facing the European Union. Just like in the previous units, it begins with a list of the topics that people are supposed to sort of engage with, some of the outcomes, and ultimately the tasks that students have to perform each week. begins by giving them some background on a particular problem. In this case, it's the issue of whether or not the European Union is democratic, and assign them a couple of readings addressing that particular question. I then present them with a scenario. In this case, they're being asked to examine democratic legitimacy for the new president of the European Union, Herman Van Rompuy, and considering his needs as this newly elected leader of the European Union, how can he use his office to promote democratic legitimacy? In order to do so, they have to understand both why there are questions about democratic legitimacy in the European Union, applying all sorts of concepts and issues we've addressed in the earlier learning units, but also to come up with feasible, actionable solutions to a real-world challenge. Eventually, students develop a problem statement, what they really think is the true issue of democratic legitimacy in the EU and why it's a challenge, why it needs to be addressed. And then they develop a solution and eventually write or submit a memo to me as a group, right, sort of those learning groups, as a memo that identifies how to solve the problem. And that is essentially the course in sort of a nutshell. The advantages or sort of feedback that students have given me so far and in other classes that I've taught using a similar method is that this mode is challenging because it requires students to sort of think through, think from someone else's perspective. But by doing that, it sort of challenges us to understand the sort of real-world implications of the information that they're receiving, as well as to actually have concrete solutions to real-world problems, a skill that they probably aren't going to be applying to resolving the EU's problems, but they can apply to actual political problems in other places or in their own personal lives.